In July 2010, police across Northumbria began searching for a man who had disappeared shortly after being released from prison. Within hours, the search would turn into one of the largest manhunts in modern British policing history. A rapidly escalating series of violent incidents that would place the multiple communities on alert. The man at the centre of the investigation was Raoul Moat, a former nightclub doorman from the Newcastle area. At the time of the events, Moat was 37 years old and had recently completed a short prison sentence related to an assault conviction. Those who knew him described a personality that could appear calm and sociable at times, but unpredictable and volatile during periods of personal stress. In the years leading up to 2010, Moat's life had been marked by unstable employment, strained personal relationships, and repeated contact with the criminal justice system. Raised in the northeast of England, Moat had worked various jobs, including security roles, before gradually becoming more involved in violent incidents that led to several criminal convictions. Friends and acquaintances later told investigators that arguments and confrontations were not uncommon, particularly when he believed he had been treated unfairly. In the period shortly before his release from prison in July 2010, Moat's personal circumstances had become increasingly unstable. Relationship tensions, financial pressures, and a growing sense of resentment towards certain individuals appeared to be intensifying, creating a situation that investigators would later identify as a critical turning point. Upon his release, Moat returned to the community, carrying unresolved grievances and a clear intention, later expressed in written communications, to confront individuals he believed had wronged him. Within a very short time, those intentions would translate into violent action. What began as the movements of a recently released prisoner attempting to re-enter everyday life would, over the course of only a few days, develop into a sequence of shootings that would dominate national news coverage and trigger an unprecedented multi-agency police operation. In the days surrounding his release from prison in July 2010, Raoul Moat's behaviour began to reflect a growing sense of anger and grievance directed towards specific individuals. Investigators later determined that he had become increasingly focused on personal disputes that had developed during his time in custody. During his imprisonment, Moat had learned information that led him to believe his former partner had begun a new relationship. This belief appeared to intensify feelings of resentment and hostility, which he later expressed in communications discovered during the investigation. After leaving prison, Moat began making contact with acquaintances and gathering items that would later become central to the investigation. His movements in the first days following release showed a pattern of preparation rather than spontaneous behaviour, indicating that the violence that followed was not entirely unplanned. People who encountered him during this period later told investigators that he appeared tense and agitated, often speaking about perceived injustices and expressing strong anger toward individuals he believed had wronged him. Some acquaintances would later report that his behaviour felt noticeably different from previous encounters. At the same time, Moat was moving between locations in the northeast, staying temporarily with acquaintances while avoiding drawing significant attention to himself. These movements would later help investigators reconstruct the timeline of events leading up to the first attack. In communications recovered after the incidents, Moat expressed a growing hostility toward both specific individuals and, more broadly, law enforcement authorities. These statements would later play a role in helping investigators understand the motivations behind the escalating sequence of events. By the time police first became aware of the unfolding situation, the period of escalation had already passed its critical point. The warning signs, expressions of anger, targeted resentment, and rapid preparation had developed over only a short span of time, setting the stage for the violent incidents that would soon follow. In the early hours of July 3rd, 2010, Raoul Moat carried out the first of a series of shootings that would quickly escalate into a nationwide manhunt. The initial attack took place in the Northumbria region and was directed at individuals he believed were connected to personal disputes. During this incident, Moat shot and killed Chris Brown, the partner of his former girlfriend, and seriously injured his former partner, who survived the attack. Emergency services responded quickly, and both victims were transported to hospital, where one later died from his injuries. Following the shooting, Moat fled the scene, prompting police to begin an urgent search operation. At the time, investigators believed they were dealing with a targeted attack involving a known suspect, but the scale of the threat would soon expand. Several days later, Moat carried out a second shooting, this time targeting a police officer in what investigators later described as a deliberate attack on law enforcement. The officer, who was conducting routine patrol duties at the time, was seriously injured but survived. The attack on a police officer significantly increased public safety concerns and led to a major escalation in the police response. Officers across the region were placed on high alert, armed patrols were increased, and members of the public were warned not to approach the suspect under any circumstances. During the days that followed, Moat moved between rural and urban locations, while the police attempted to track his movements through witness reports, vehicle sightings, and intelligence gathered from associates. The unpredictability of his location made the search operation increasingly complex. With two major shooting incidents now connected to the same suspect, the investigation shifted fully into a coordinated manhunt involving multiple police forces, specialist search teams, and extensive public appeals for information. The priority was no longer simply identifying the suspect, but locating him quickly enough to prevent further attacks. Following the shootings, police launched one of the largest search operations in modern British policing history. Armed officers, specialist search units, and air support were deployed across Northumbria as investigators worked to track the suspect's movements and prevent further attacks. Public warnings were issued advising residents not to approach Raoul under any circumstances. His photograph and identifying details were widely circulated through national media, and the case quickly became the focus of continuous news coverage across the United Kingdom. Investigators began gathering intelligence from associates, reviewing CCTV footage, and analysing vehicle sightings in an effort to narrow down the search area. Reports from members of the public provided numerous potential leads, although verifying each sighting proved time-consuming and complex. As the search expanded, police concentrated efforts on rural areas where the suspect was believed to be moving between locations while attempting to avoid detection. Specialist officers conducted coordinated searches of woodland, farmland, and remote locations across the region. The scale of the operation required coordination between multiple police forces, intelligence teams, and specialist firearms units. Roads were temporarily closed in certain areas, patrols were increased, and local communities were kept informed through regular public safety updates. Throughout the manhunt, officers faced the challenge of balancing rapid response with the need to ensure public safety. The unpredictable nature of the suspects' movements meant that search teams had to remain prepared for the possibility of further violent encounters at any time. After several days of intensive searching, police began receiving increasingly focused intelligence, suggesting that the suspect was moving through rural areas of Northumberland. The search operation gradually narrowed, bringing investigators closer to the final phase of the manhunt. After nearly a week of intensive searching, police received intelligence indicating that Raoul Moat had been located in a rural area near the town of Rothbury in Northumberland. Specialist firearms officers and negotiators were deployed to the location as the search operation entered its final stage. The discovery of the suspect's location prompted the establishment of a controlled perimeter, with officers securing the surrounding area while negotiators attempted to open communication. The objective was to bring the situation to a peaceful resolution while ensuring the safety of both the public and the officers involved. Over several hours, negotiators made repeated efforts to persuade Moat to surrender. The standoff drew significant national attention, with media coverage documenting the unfolding situation as police worked to manage both operational demands and public safety concerns. Throughout the confrontation, armed officers remained positioned at a distance, while negotiators continued attempting dialogue. Specialist units were placed on standby in the event that the situation escalated, but the primary strategy remained focused on de-escalation and peaceful surrender. As negotiations continued into the night, the tensions surrounding the standoff increased. Officers maintained the secure perimeter, while communication attempts persisted, reflecting the complexity of managing a high-risk incident involving an armed suspect. In the early hours of the following morning, the standoff came to an end when Moat died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound before officers could take him into custody. Emergency medical personnel attended the scene, but he was pronounced dead shortly afterward. The conclusion of the confrontation brought an end to the immediate threat that had led to days of intensive police operations. For investigators, however, the case would continue through detailed reviews, victim support efforts, and analysis of the events that had unfolded over the previous week. The end of the manhunt brought relief to communities across Northumbria. But for the victims and their families, the consequences of the events continued long after the headlines faded. Lives had been permanently changed within the space of only a few days, leaving a lasting emotional impact on those directly affected. In the months that followed, police conducted detailed reviews of the investigation, examining how the search operation had been coordinated across multiple forces and how intelligence had been shared during a rapidly evolving situation. These reviews later contributed to operational discussions about managing large-scale armed incidents. The case also prompted wider conversations about media coverage during ongoing police operations. The unprecedented level of live reporting raised questions about how public information, safety messaging, and operational confidentiality should be balanced during major incidents. For law enforcement agencies, the Manhunt became an important case study in multi-agency coordination, rural search strategies, and negotiation procedures during high-risk confrontations. Training programs in later years would reference aspects of the operation when preparing officers for complex incident response scenarios. Communities across the Northeast were left to process the sudden shift from ordinary daily life to a period marked by fear, uncertainty, and intensive police presence. The event served as a reminder of how quickly violent incidents can transform public spaces into scenes of emergency response. Support services continued working with victims and their families, focusing on long-term recovery and assistance following the traumatic events. Public memorials and personal tributes ensured that those affected were remembered not solely for the violence that occurred, but for the lives they had lived before it. The Moat case remains one of the most widely recognised manhunt investigations in modern British policing history. For investigators, it stands as an example of how rapidly incidents can escalate, and how coordinated response, negotiation, and public cooperation play critical roles in bringing dangerous situations to an end.
If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like. It really helps the channel and tells YouTube to share it with more people. If you're interested in more true crime stories, police investigations, and the cases that changed Britain forever, make sure you're subscribed and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next upload. Thanks for watching.